How's it going, everyone? So, as you can see, we've got the truck in here today. So today's going to be focused on this thing. We've got a repair that I need to do that I haven't actually figured out for certain if this is going to fix this thing. So a little bit of backstory on what we're doing. So I pulled this truck out of a field out in Cedar Creek, Texas, and it had been abandoned. I mean, literally the frame was broken. The toolbox was taken out of the back of it, the hood was in the bed, and the engine was locked up. So in the time that I've had it, I've put an engine in it that I pulled out of the junkyard, I put a rear end out of it that I ordered on eBay, and welded up the frame. And it's held together just fine. And like I've talked about in the past, I think there are plans, or I have plans to pull this engine back out and either build a 360 for it, or put a 408 in it, or even just a cam and heads on this 318. We'll see what comes to it. Depending on what happens with today's repair, we might be accelerating faster towards at least building the 318. We'll see what happens. The issue that we're dealing with today is an oil leak, and it's been an incessant oil leak. This truck has had. So when I first got it, the intake manifold was actually cracked on top of it, and it was completely ruined. So the very first thing I did was go get an intake, put an intake manifold on it, and found out the engine was locked up, replaced the engine. Well, I've always had intake manifold problems. This intake, it's all cast iron. The entire engine from bottom to top is cast iron. As it has always had a leak at the back near the distributor, the oil pressure sending unit, and the intake manifold. Now what these trucks are known for is oil leaks at that oil pressure sending unit or at the intake valley, where basically you got your two cylinder heads sit here, your intake drops down in the middle, and right back here at the very back of the engine, where oil can sling up, it'll come out the back. So I've done this intake probably 4 or 5 times now with different combinations of silicone and gaskets and stuff like that. And actually we're going to try a slightly different intake gasket setup this time. And we'll see how it does. If it doesn't work, if we continue to have oil leaks, because the frame still needs some more work too, what we'll probably do at some point before too long is get an engine hoist in here, now that I have room for one, and rip this engine back out, where we can very, very carefully look at everything and figure out exactly what is leaking on this thing and fix it. And while we're in there, we'll fix the frame. We can go into that later. But for now, let me get you over here, show you kind of what we're working with and where we're going to go from here, what needs to come off, and we'll get it done. Alright guys, so let me crawl under here. We're crawling under passenger side. Let me take a look up under here. See if I can show you where this leak is. So, as you can see, so this is the bottom of the bell housing and the back of the engine. See that oil droplet on the bottom of it? So if we follow it up the side of the block, so I can get you where you can actually see. Alright, so a little hard for y'all to see. This video is probably flipping all around right now, so best of luck with that. But the oil that we're looking at, you can see the black spot there. That's the cylinder head, backside of the cylinder head. If you look all the way up there, that little black cylinder, focus. There we go. So that's the back of our cylinder head, our oil pressure sending unit, and the silver thing is our distributor. But our oil runs down, we can see it, that shiny bit on that seam is running down the back side of the cylinder head. It's coming from up there. Now, like I said, I've been in here multiple times and changed out these seals. But what we're going to do is try and pull this intake off and see if we can figure out where exactly our leak's coming from back there. So, Okay, so first things first, like I said, we need to get to the very back of the engine down here, and then pull intake stuff off of here. I'll bring in here, show you what we need to remove, because we're gonna need to get all the way back in the back. It's kind of a pain to reach. So. Okay, first things first, this guy's got to come off. Luckily, pulling these, when Dodge designed this, it was fairly simple to remove. So you've basically got just a few bolts, one up here, let's see, two on the bottom side, and then one straight down there at the back. And we can take this whole guy out, lay it on the side so it's out of the way, and then it's just disconnecting coolant hoses. We're going to have to drain the coolant. We'll drain that in just a second. But we'll disconnect all our coolant hoses, disconnect all of our wires, everything, go to our throttle body injection, pull our springs off, our throttle cables, and then we can start pulling. At least one valve cover has to come off, unfortunately. And I've got a gasket for one, so we'll pull one valve cover so we can kind of lift it, rock it, and pull it out. At that point, we should be able to see what's going on with our silicone at the front and rear of the valley and what's going on with our intake gaskets. Hopefully what we find is that in the back, the silicone has kind of, well, we can see somewhere where it didn't adhere properly, or it wasn't enough of it, and that oil's been slipping out the back side. Once I get a little more off here, I can show you what's going on at the back where we've got this buildup of oil. And like I said, there's a few possible culprits back there, but I don't think that any of them are either the distributor or the oil pressure sending unit. And unfortunately, this is why I really wish I didn't have to pull these valve covers off, because these were a pain to get them to seal, and these are finally sealed. But unfortunately, we've got the leak in the middle that we've got to deal with. So I guess I'll start pulling bolts off and draining coolant, and we'll get to it. Alright guys, so I've got most of the stuff disconnected up here. We got, as you can see, things are starting to open up more. We don't have a spring here anymore. All the hose have been disconnected, all the wiring's out of the way. I'm still waiting on some of the coolant to drain. Then we can get these heater hoses and the main radiator hose off, and then the compressor can come out and lay over. But what I wanted to show you, reach back here. Okay, so this is that top side where we were just looking. And if you look down here, what you'll see is, it's all kind of oily. Maybe a little hard to tell over video, but basically, yeah, you can see it there. Everything's all kind of greasy and oily, especially over that way. And what happens is, there's a sealant you put down along this groove on the backside of the intake manifold. Well, they're known for that gap having to be fairly large, having to have a fair amount of sealant, and leaking. So, like I said, we've been in here multiple times, but I'm going to try it again today. So, here in a minute, when it's done draining, I'll get those hoses off. We'll get in here, try and pull this thing off so we can figure out what's going on with it. Still on the fence if I'm going to bother to pull the distributor out of it. Timing's set. I'd rather not mess with it. And if I can get away with it, I'd rather just leave it in place. So... And of course, I've discovered some other minor things in here, like the blend door. The zones haven't been switching very well in the truck. Well, this is the vacuum line that does that. And that melted at some point in such a way that it is unhappy. So that might be part of that. So just when you're in here doing other stuff, just always make sure you look around for anything else that's going to be an imminent issue. Like also this. They don't make fuel line, or so I'm told, because I'm not that old. But they don't make fuel line like they used to. This line is only, at most, 2 years old. Probably more like 1 year. And it's already cracking. And it doesn't even get that hot in here. So we'll have to change that out. Luckily, that's the return side. So it's not very much pressure. Because the inside's only going to be about 20 PSI coming in. The return side, honestly, I pulled it off. There was nothing in it. Now we only started it up just to drive it in here, but usually there's a little in here, but you're talking a few pounds of pressure. So this line's not super critical, except for the fact that if it were to completely rupture, you are going to start leaking gasoline right on top of your engine, which is never a good thing. But let me get these hoses off, get this compressor out of here, and we'll start pulling the rest of this thing apart. All right, so let's take a look at what we got in here. So we went ahead and pulled the intake manifold off, and this is what you're gonna see. So these are our old intake gaskets. These are what actually run along the inside and seal between the cylinder head and the intake that rests in here. Now looking down here, this is where we suspected our leak here at the back. Now looking down here at all this stuff, I don't see a smoking gun like I would like to see, but I do see a lot of kind of porous lines and uneven distribution of silicone, and I kind of am suspicious that as it set down in here, maybe it pushed it in such a way. Again, so the way this leak was one of these things where if you drove it around town and you really never raised the RPM very much, it would barely leak. But if you got it on the highway and you drove for an extended period of time when oil's being flung around in here really fast, it would leak profusely and you would leave puddles everywhere. So it's possible that, again, it's kind of a hairline leak, that it just kind of slips out. Not helped by gravity, by of course the fact that the engine is kind of canted backwards here. And we've got the same kind of seal here at the front. Now, don't be too concerned that at the corners it's missing the silicone. I'll go look at the intake in a second, the actual big iron bit, because I think it ripped those off when it was coming out. But we'll take a look at it too and see if we can kind of figure out maybe where oil was getting out of this thing and how. Because, again, like I said, I've been in here multiple times, and other than this oil leak, this truck runs perfectly fine. There are no issues with it. Realistically, as far as driving, you won't have to open the hood for a couple months at least, and that's really just to change the oil. So let me get on the bench and we'll look at the actual intake manifold and see where we're at. At the very least, we need to start cleaning things up and start putting it all back together. So we'll get started on that. Okay, so this is our intake manifold removed from the truck. This would be the front side, and back here's the back. So we can see, we can start to look at what was potentially our leak point. When we look under here, we can get some idea of the distribution of what was going on, and we can kind of see, or what I'm suspicious was happening. So if you look out here at the edges, now we have the remnants of the old hard edge that would have been right like that. But see how we've got wetness up in here? That's coolant dripping from the intake. But so we can see on this outer edge, it's mostly actually, it's just kind of superficial. We go across, nothing crazy. And then here, we actually have a bunch of dark, nasty oil saturation. And we also have this open spot in here. And remember, this corner would be where the silicone, we're suspecting it was ripped off when this came out. And we can see this edge here where it was, so that was in there. But look, this back behind it, there's no silicone left on the block there. And this is barely anything, and you've got this heavy dark oil buildup right in there. Now, it'll make a mess when you remove it, but generally speaking, actually, oil's not gonna come back and cover this thing unless you dunk it or something. So you can look at this and kind of get an idea of where it might have been coming from. So I suspect this silicone, for whatever reason, the oil was working its way out under it or around it somehow, out through here, and just kind of coming out the edge. It's a little hard to say for certain. Again, it's kind of a guess. The other possibility that I've considered, although I don't think this is particularly likely, and I'm not seeing any evidence of it, but I wanted to look for it, was if there was any evidence that the intake itself might be cracked. Because it's iron, which makes that very unlikely. But again, the sheer number of times we've done this particular seal, we're in the realm of either rash incompetence, or, which I suppose is always possible, or something very strange is going on, something not normal. So, in any case, I flip it up. Okay, so here's the underside of the intake. I'm taking our look. This is again the back side, the back edge. Again, trying to figure out where or how oil was getting out of it. Still not seeing like an obvious smoking gun. I do see, well, that's a coolant passage though, so that would be wet. Keep going down, keep moving down. Again, that's where coolant drips out. but I'm not seeing an obvious smoking gun here, unless what we're seeing right here is not actually a tear like when it came apart. That's actually where the silicone cured in such a way that there was a crevice running through it. And if that's the case, it's extremely unfortunate, but that would absolutely allow oil to kind of wander its way through. So I'm not sure. And everything else still looks reasonably healthy. You can see where all the old intake gasket ran along the actual intake ports for the engine. Look up here at the front. We've got some silicone left over we're going to scrape off. It's possible there was some leakage coming out here too. We had a little bit of front cover stuff going on as well. So, alright. And while we got you here, this is the valve cover, the driver's side one, which I need to scrape out and remove all that remains of this old composite one. Scrape out, wire wheel, clean it up. It's going to be a pain, and it's going to be a mess. So we can reattach it to the truck. Hopefully have no more oil leaks. So, alright, well, I'll get back with you when I've got all this cleaned up. So these are now reasonably cleaned up. I might scrape a little bit more on this one, but our intake ports where the gasket actually adheres are all clean, at least as clean as a 318 needs to be. And this area has now had all the sealant removed from it. It's now a nice, clean, smooth surface that we can work with. Same deal for this driver side valve cover. Went ahead and ground out all the sealant, cleaned it all up. Now it's nice, shiny all the way across. We can seal it. So these are the intake gaskets that we're going to be running on this. I've never actually put these on a truck. Considered it before. The older style gaskets that we've used in the past, and I still need to clean up, are these, which are more of a composite style. See, they're kind of a thicker, maybe what you're more traditionally used to, a gasket, as opposed to that stamped sheet metal. And in the past, I've far preferred those, because if we have those, we don't have to worry about, well, presumably they're thicker, they're more likely to take up more gap and keep things from leaking. However, if anything, if we can get the cylinder head or the intake to sit even closer and lower, it's even lower likelihood that it's going to have a gasket leak. So hopefully the crush
thickness. On the metal ones might even be a little thinner. I mean, you're talking thousandths of an inch, but it's something. Um, so we're going to do that. Let me get this one cleaned up as well, and then we can start actually reassembling things. See if we can put these intake manifold gaskets in. I'm going to put what is likely a federally regulated quantity of silicone on this. Expect black helicopters and government agencies to start arriving for the sheer amount of silicone that will be going on. Department of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Automotive Silicone will show up and take me to jail, but it's gotta get done. Alright, so we're gonna start by squishing some into here on the off chance that some of our leak has been there here. So one of the things you need to keep in mind if you're actually doing this kind of assembly, and we'll get into this whenever we build that Fiero engine. But these little corners right here, where the cylinder heads meet the block, are notorious for leaking. And I don't think they're the problem here, but they are certainly something to keep in mind. Let me start running my bead silicone along here. Okay, so as you can see, it's quite a bead of silicone. Let me put another one here at the front. Alright, well, here goes nothing that this is hopefully sufficient. Basically I have an entire tube on both of them. So, it's also praying that these metal gaskets don't bite me, which they might. It is possible. I'm gonna hope and pray. Alright, so these, make sure y'all are still in focus here. Alright. They've got these little kickouts in the metal, or stamp outs. So they sit down right into where it was supposed to be, presumably. Okay. So put the other one in. Keep going in and out of focus there, I apologize. Now the tricky thing here to me, or what I presume is the tricky thing, is likely going to be a slight issue. Give this one a little bit of a bend. Doesn't need much, just enough to stay in its place. Is that these rear coolant ports don't want to completely drain for me, and with that being the case, that certainly raises the potential for coolant to try and push its way out and create early oil leaks. So I'm hoping that that's not going to be something that happens. But alright, so we've got this in here. Presumably the silicone's kind of setting up. It's not going to dry immediately. But what I'm going to do is grab the intake manifold, bring it over here, and we'll start trying to lower it into place. It's going to be a little bit of a mess, but it is what it is. It's got to go. This truck's got to get back to work. I don't know if I mentioned at any point, probably did, that this intake manifold is obscenely heavy by any modern standard. If you're used to working on anything after this point, after the mid 80s or late 80s, you probably haven't had to lift an intake manifold like this. I know how astounded I was. I thought it was still attached the first time I went to go pick one up off the truck. I thought there's no way it's that heavy, and it is. All right. Truth. Okay. I think our gaskets slipped a little, but as long as we can get them to line up again. We start playing with it. Flip flops, no. Anyway. Got the intake manifold assembled and attached to the truck now. I went ahead and off camera we have a little bit of a charging issue with the video with camera, but it is tightened down now. So what we're going to do is it's kind of the last step before I can finally finish assembling everything and start putting most of it back together. We're going to go ahead and put the this guy in. This is the valve cover gasket. Now what we're going to want to do is just adhere it with a thin layer of silicone on both sides. And there are probably people that disagree, but those people I would characterize as wrong. Again, I've been in here a number of times doing this. If you're using the cork type, you're probably right. You probably don't want to mess with silicone on it. It'll be just fine without it. But if you're dealing with these composite style ones, here's I can tell the only way to keep them from keep them from leaking is to silicone them on both sides. I've fought with these, and I've managed to get them to seal with a thin layer of silicone on both sides of the gasket, but they might work a little better. I've got a little more of this stuff in the garage too, or out in the shed, luckily, because God, it takes a lot to do all this, at least if you're me. But I've been through this a couple times and trying to get these valve cover gaskets to seal. They might work better with aluminum, the cast valve covers, but I've even looked at a set of those purely as a maintenance item. The problem I've run into is I don't want to spend $250 or more for a set of valve covers. You know, like on a truck that I never open the hood. It's not a show truck, it's a work truck. The only reason I want them is they don't deform like the steel ones do, like these stamped steel valve covers. But, you know, it is what it is. But, alright. So now we've got a thin layer of silicone in here. What I'm going to do is take it and line up the holes. I'm just going to drop it in here and use the silicone to basically glue it in place so that we can just drop this thing into the truck and hopefully snug it, let the silicone kind of do its thing, and then crank it down a little bit tighter. We're still never going to go real tight on them because, again, one of the downsides of stamped steel on a valve cover gasket, or on a valve cover in general, is that it warps, it twists, and if you start tightening it down real hard, you start running into issues. So let me let that set up for a minute. I'll put a thin layer on it and I'll meet you over by the truck and we will try dropping this in there. There. Okay. Hopefully we can smear that in. Hopefully, a lot of hopefullys here. Hopefully we don't have much in the way of a sealing problem with it. So the way these go in, if you've never had to deal with these, idea here. So you've got fastener like this with a little wing on it. It's going to go in, like if the valve cover were up here, in the little channel it sits in, it goes in like that. So when you tighten it, tightens the wing against it. The wing will kind of hold it in place so that everything can kind of go in where it needs to, and should be okay. If it's backwards, won't necessarily not work, but you might have issues with it trying to twist on you and not line up right. And again, every little thing, every little step you can do as you do something like this that's right, as opposed to what is technically wrong, is one more percent likely that it will work. You won't be back in here again soon. And we're certainly hoping for that. Alright, try tightening these down. I believe these were 7/16. Yes, okay. Now you may see also then, or notice that I'm not using the electric ratchet to put all this stuff in. And that is for a very good reason. Generally speaking, grab a wrench. You don't want to do that if you can help it. If you have to use, if you use the power tool to put everything in, there's a very real possibility you'll over torque things or under torque things because you don't have any real idea where torque is, because inherently the tool kind of numbs you to whatever's going on as far as the way things are in, coming, tightening down, things like that. So what you want to do is, especially like say this valve cover, right? We got silicone on both sides of it. We're actually not going to go to full tightness like for a while. So we're just going to snug it. Just snugged. That's all we're gonna do. And we're gonna, honestly, this thing's probably, we're gonna figure something out because I'm probably gonna have to get out of the driveway or out of the garage for the night, but I'm gonna let it sit for at least a few hours, if I can, before I start, before I torque them down. And the reason for that is because I don't want to just mash all the silicone out. and cause a bigger problem. Because the silicone does a couple things. It works as a sealant, but when it's wet, it's actually kind of a lubricant and can actually cause stuff to be able to tighten down harder than you might actually want it to. So you can strip things, you can crack your new gasket, all kinds of stuff, and just end up worse off than you were before. Grab another wrench. And if that happens, I mean, obviously you might be back in here again. So I'm just gonna kind of snug these. I'm not going for kill yet. Just kind of snug them down. And honestly, where they are right now might actually be good enough. Valve covers generally don't have to be very tight, really, regardless of the model. Okay. So next thing that needs to go on is going to be our throttle bracket. And really, this should have been torqued down when I finished torquing all the others, but I guess it was the last in sequence just now. So the big reason I wanted to do that was leave it off was because I wanted to make sure that I had room to put this valve cover on. Because if I didn't want to complicate things, make it any more difficult than it needed to be. So bracket on. We're getting pretty close. Pretty close to being back together. The hard part, so to speak, is done. Now it's just Legos. Alright. So, let's start with, this is handy. Just put this back on. Intake manifold to water pump. Not the kind of screwdriver I need. Is the kind of screwdriver I need. Now, hoses are a little different. If you want to tighten hoses by power tool, you can. There's really nothing wrong with that. Just kind of, be a little cognizant of how much force you're putting, because you're not likely to necessarily hurt much, but you might break a hose clamp, which is annoying, and then you have to replace it. I prefer to just tighten them by hand. Now, one thing I will do sometimes if they're in a bad spot, I just can't get them tight, is put a socket on that fits the right size and use that. This spot is a good candidate for that, but I'm being sloppy. Just tightening it with a screwdriver because too lazy to go figure out the right size. Gee, I wonder why it started leaking in the first place. This guy's lazy. Yeah, it's like that sometimes. Okay. All right, next thing, let's go ahead. Let's see. Climb up in here. It's gone forever. That's good. All right. Next thing you can do, you can probably put these raggedy old fuel connections back on. V. There's a connector here. One thing that is nice about these, all these electrical connectors, there are not many of them, and they're all pretty simple to deal with. It's not really any way you're going to get them wrong or have any real significant problems with them. It's an oxygen sensor. Feed that through. Coolant temp. That's coolant temp to ECM. This next one is coolant temp to gauge. That's one too. That'll give you fits if you don't know that ECM and gauge often have different connections. All right. Cold start injector. At least I'm pretty sure that's what that is. Separate little fuel injector here on the side. All right, now fuel connections. And we are going to leave that raggedy little hose on there, but we'll keep an eye on it. Again, it is the return, so really not as worried about it as I probably should be, but very little fuel pressure goes through there. It's really, especially on a cold start, I mean, it's pretty much just burning all of it. And then this is very little fuel pressure, so I'm not real worried about it. I'll keep an eye on it. And hey, you know, the way this thing's been going, we may be back in here anyway in a week, so if it is leaking, we'll probably spot it, right? It's not constant, we shouldn't think that way, but that's how it tends to be, seems like. All right. Am I rambling, entertaining? Probably not. Ooh. Figure that out. The kickdown cable, kickdown arm is not wanting to fit through there. That's a problem. And I'm not taking that valve cover back off to deal with that. So I may have to climb underneath and deal with that. So, this junky little bolt, it's just a keeper. Alright, okay. Let me see if I can crawl underneath and figure out this. I suppose I can just... No, you don't want to bend it because that's not good. Alright. Okay. Got that back in place. Just had to unbolt it, bolt it back in. No biggie. Alright. So, let's see here. If I recall how this all goes back together. This goes through here. The kick down goes on there. And this is what adjusts, so like your throttle will push this back to give you a transmission kick down. Tell the transmission how when to kick down. If memory serves, that's correct. If I'm not, it's just going to immediately grab first gear. one of the only things on this truck is metric. And near as I can tell, it's because it's air conditioning. They designed it with metric fasteners. It's kind of like the emission stuff was the same way. The emission stuff that's not here anymore. As near as I can tell, the way Chrysler designed it was basically anything not associated with winning world wars is metric. If it has to do with winning world wars, it's SAE. As it should be. Put a little extension on that. Put a little English on it. Started. So on the other side. Okay. Now learn from experience. Let's see if we can get that big, like 15 millimeter one in the back first. Before we go tighten it all the way down. $14 sorry. Even more communist. Okay. Alright. So that's now installed. Tightening class 3 here. You don't have yourself one of these electric 3/8 ratchets, get you one. It'll change your life. The only downside to them really is that when they inevitably do fail, you don't feel like working on cars again until you buy another one. Belts here. Pretty much everything reassembled. I don't think I've shown one of these on the channel before yet, so it's a handy tool. Kind of commonly referred to as funnel buddies or spill-proof funnel. But if you've never messed with one before, and you've had coolant get all over your floor when you're doing anything antifreeze related, much like the electric ratchet, this will change your life. Basically, it comes a set of adapters. Find whichever one of them fits your application. In my case, I do believe this is it. It doesn't have to be super tight. It's spring loaded down. This on here, top open. Go under here and get my coolant and close the drain.
now comes the really fun part to some degree. Will this thing leak stuff all over the ground? Don't know. Really don't. But hopefully not. Put some antifreeze in it from patented automotive trash can. Of course, as you fill something like this, you're going to hear it fill in different stages. Look for leaks. Listen for it hitting the ground. You hear the bubbles coming out as it runs through, or you can even start the truck here in a minute like this. And it'll let all these air bubbles work their way to the top. Okay, apparently it's all it wants to drink right now. It's not profusely pouring anywhere on the ground. I'm going to start the truck, fingers crossed. Fingers crossed for no massive coolant or intake leaks. Or any leaks, really, preferably. Okay, so that is gasoline that is violently leaking. So let me, which is probably one of the few times in my life I've ever said that's a good thing. I was worried that what we were leaking was coolant. And if it was coolant from back there and it wasn't a hose, then that would mean the intake was leaking and we'd be starting all over again. But it looks like it's a hose clamp, it's just not positioned well.
is too far back. Needs to be a little farther forward on the barb. Get up in here. Okay. Let's hope that that was in fact the case. I mean, I know it's gas. Gas is leaking. You may or may not have to replace this piece of hose. Alright, let's start it up again and look for profuse fuel leaks. Alright, that's not good. Back, that's a lie. We are leaking gas. Just now we're leaking it from that little return line. Never fail. Always something. With that, I can leave that alone for a minute, so I'll find some 5/16 line. Let it run. Change out that little bit of return. Less than ideal, but again, I'll take minor unrelated leaks over big deal leaks that need to be replaced immediately. That are associated with your prior repair. Can you hear that little bubbling? Air pockets working their way out of the cooling system. At least this is actually like the one part of the engine that's generally always cool. One of the interesting scientific things about airflow is that adiabatically it'll cool off your intake, your throttle blades and throttle body. Fuel itself generally stays cold. So fuel systems typically are actually not very hot to work on. It's kind of nice. Also, it's safer in general. Okay, no more fuel leaks. Get back with you whenever we're done. Hopefully we're good. We'll see. All right. Well, time will tell if that actually fixed anything. All we do know right now is we don't have any profuse leaks coming out of the bottom of it. I did go ahead and bleed the cooling system out of it. Truck's running and idling very smoothly, very happily, so that implies that at least the intake gaskets are sealed and doing their job. Now, whether or not we've repaired our oil leak, truthfully, it's going to take time, because even the old leak was not one you were really going to pinpoint in the driveway. It takes time. You got to drive it, got to clean it, drive it, keep an eye on it. So that's what we're going to do. But that's going to do it for today's episode. At least this way, this is now done. And if this does end up leaking again, you might very well see sooner rather than later this engine coming out of the truck, because we're going to need to figure out what it is. And at this amount of effort that's been put into it, we might as well do some frame repair, right? So stay tuned for that. If it works out, fine. Then the next thing that you'll see will be, well, maybe the next thing you see anyway will be some paint and body stuff. We're going to see if we can do some paint correction, since I've never actually done any of that. The single stage paint, while it looks okay from kind of a distance, is getting very chalky, very tired looking. I want to see if we can buff it out and make it look nice. So I'll see you next time. Thank you for watching.